My name's Jess and I'm a wildlife vet, and this week I pledged to walk 100 miles in February as part of Wildlife Vets International's Lockdown Challenge. So who are Wildlife Vets International? Well, if you don't know about them, they're a great charity. They're dedicated to providing veterinary training and expertise for conservation charities and organisations across the world. And later this year, I'm going to be working in partnership with them to develop a project investigating the health of conflict leopards in Nepal. So what's all this about a lockdown warrior challenge? Well, I have to say it is a great challenge. Absolutely anybody can take part and probably feel better for doing so. It's so accessible. You can pick any distance you want, 25, 50, 100. You can do it in kilometres, you can do it in miles, you can walk it, you can run it, you can cycle it. I think there's even someone who's doing part of it on a rowing machine. So anything that you can measure distance on, you can do it that way. There's also a Facebook group so that all of the participants can keep each other updated with their progress and support each other and cheer each other on. I have to say that I have felt very lucky that I live in London, relatively balmy London, this week, because there's been all sorts of pictures of snow and sleet and very dangerous ground. So I'm glad to be down here where the sun is almost shining. But you know, all of those endeavours have not been in vain. So far this week we have raised over £900, which is a phenomenal achievement. And just by people getting out and doing things that make them feel better and that are good for them. So as I said, my challenge was to walk 100 miles in February, but I also pledged that I was going to try and spot 100 wildlife species while I was doing that. Now, living in London, that might not seem like the easiest of challenges, and I suspect it probably will get harder as I go on, so I'm going to pace myself and just tell you about 25 animals that I see each week. But I have walked a little bit further than 25 miles I'd need to meet my 100-mile target, so I've walked 33.5 miles since Monday, and this is what I've seen.
Robins. These were the first species to greet me as I stepped out onto my 100-mile challenge. And at first they were impossible to photograph, hiding in the brambles like this guy, or sitting at the top of trees against grey skies like this guy. But then I was staring out across the lake looking at something else, and this chap just appeared almost at my elbow. What a treat. I really do like robins. They're bright coloured faces. They've always got a song to give you, and they come and see you when you're doing stuff in the garden. So I'm a big fan of robins. Moving on to the river and some ducks. When I said I was going to try and count 100 species and I mentioned ducks, my sister said that I needed to be a little bit more specific than ducks if I wanted to get to 100, and she's quite right. So this is a mallard. It's the most common duck in the UK. There are around 100,000 of them breeding here, but a whopping 650,000 spend their winters with us. So if you've ever thought to yourself there seem to be a lot more ducks around in the winter than in the summer, you'd be quite right. This is a female mallard duck. When I was a kid, I always thought it was really unfair that male mallards were more colourful, but as I get older, I think I appreciate the more muted pattern of the females more. When I found this guy, I was very excited that he might be a separate species and he could help me on my way to my 100 target, but I couldn't find him anywhere in my bird book. Having checked in with my friendly bird expert, I can report that he's a domestic mallard that has probably been bred to look a certain way or crossed with something else. There are apparently quite a few of these mallard-type birds out there, and they are sometimes referred to as manky mallards, which seems a bit harsh. I think he's quite nice. But still, he is not helping me to my total. So on we go. Tufted ducks. I think these guys look so cool. I thought these guys were the fawns of ducks until I saw their offspring and I realised they were the real rebels. So this is an adolescent tufted duck, and there is just something about the way they carry their heads that makes me picture them riding a motorbike. Maybe I've just spent too long staring into bushes looking for wildlife this week, but I think these guys are really cool. Moving away from ducks and onto geese. I'm sure you will all have seen these. This is a Canada goose. It's very, very noisy. First introduced from the US to St James's Park, and they're now widespread across the UK. Another common goose, but this time a native species. This is a grey lag goose. In my opinion, these are so much prettier than the Canada geese. They are also the ancestors of most of the domestic geese that we have. In the winter months, our national flock here is swelled by over 80,000 birds who are overwintering from Iceland. So if you find yourself coming across a grey lag goose in the winter, there's a good chance that it normally lives in Iceland. This is an Egyptian goose, another non-native species. They were introduced in the 18th century and now breed in the wild. In my opinion, these are the funniest looking animals I have seen this week. I really enjoy. They sort of look a bit like they've been designed by a committee, I think. There are 3 species of swans that can be seen in the UK, but the mute swan is the only one that is resident, with whooper swans and Buick swans both winter visitors. Buick swans don't often hang out in London, but I will keep my eyes peeled, as I'd really like to see one. I was lucky enough to attend a talk by Sasha Dench, dubbed the human swan, who paramotored from Arctic Russia to the UK, flying with the swans so she could study their migration. It was utterly inspiring. The sort of person who reminds you of the kind of person you would like to be. If you ever get the chance to see her speak live, I thoroughly recommend it. Failing that, there is a TED Talk available on YouTube. Just Google Sasha Dench TED Talk and I'm sure you'll find it. Next, onto some gulls. Gulls seem to be everywhere, and you'd be forgiven for not looking at them too hard or thinking they were all one species. But when you do look closely, you will see some marked differences. But they can be really tricky to identify as they often look different depending on their age and season. For example, this is a black-headed gull, but this is also a black-headed gull, and so are these guys. Their heads get darker as they reach maturity, and they're typically darker in the summer months than in the winter. A good thing to do is keep an eye on their beak colour and leg colour, as that sometimes changes a little bit less. This is a lesser black-backed gull. It's hard to tell from this photo, but these guys are much bigger than the black-headed gulls. They also have yellow feet and, as the name would suggest, dark backs, although they are closer to slate grey than black, I would have said. This is a herring gull. It's slightly bigger than the lesser black-backed gull, has pink legs and greyish-brown markings on its face. The young of both the herring and lesser black-backed gulls look quite different from the adults, but I haven't seen any of them, so unfortunately I don't have a photo to show you. Moving away from the river briefly to some crows. Crows are a member of the Corvidae family and considered to be some of the most intelligent birds or animals on the planet. This is a carrion crow. They do look very similar to rooks, another member of this family, but carrion crows are all black, whereas rooks have a pale bit at the base of their beak, so you can use that to tell them apart. On to magpies. These guys are really easy to spot, very distinctive. They're another member of the Corvidae family and are one of the few species that can actually recognize themselves in a mirror. Back to the river and some coots. So coots are members of the rail family. These are aquatic birds which typically live in reeds and marshes. And although they look quite dumpy side on, they have quite narrow bodies which help them slip through the reeds. Most rails are quite shy, secretive animals, but coots tend to be much bolder and are often seen out and about, just like this guy checking out the bridge at the local lock. You're more likely to see them on the water, where they'll look more like this, or chasing each up and down the river, or sitting on top of one of their very messy nests. And where you find coots, you often seem to find moorhens. These guys are also rails and are easily identifiable by their bright red and yellow beaks. Coots and moorhens can often cause problems for boaters by nesting on the fenders of canal boats. In the UK, Once a bird has nested, it's illegal to disturb that nest. This means that the owners of boats aren't allowed to move the boat until the clutch has hatched and moved on. Great news if you're a continuous cruiser and you've just parked up in a spot that you love. Less great news if you live aboard, your water tank is running low and your toilet is about to overflow. A mammal. So this is a grey squirrel, a common sight in much of the UK. Grey squirrels were introduced from the Americas in the 1800s. Despite their comic nature, they can actually be quite damaging to woodlands and have played a major role in the decline of the native red squirrel. It's thought that without protection, red squirrels would now be extinct within the next 10 years. Thankfully, several organisations are working hard to stop this happening. One of the things that could help is the reintroduction of pine martens. Research from Ireland has shown that a high density of pine martens can actually cause grey squirrel populations to collapse and red squirrels to subsequently come back in those areas. Wildlife Vets International is actively involved in the pine marten reintroduction programme in the UK. You can find out more about that on their webpage. Back to birds and some feral pigeons. So feral pigeons are domestic pigeons which have returned to the wild. They were originally domesticated from rock doves which make their homes on sea cliffs and mountains. In cities they now often nest on the edges of buildings instead. In days gone by, domestic pigeons were used to carry messages, particularly in times of war, and there were several pigeons that were decorated war heroes. However, in the digital age, they've become somewhat superseded and are now normally regarded as a nuisance. As you can see, they come in all kinds of colours, shapes and sizes. This is a wood pigeon. It's the largest and most common wild pigeon species in the UK, and it's readily identifiable by the white patches that you can see on its neck. Back to the river again. I'm afraid I do live near a river. It's been great, so I'm not going to really apologise for it. This is a cormorant. I have to say this is a terrible photo of a cormorant. The best thing about them is when they stand on the bank drying their wings, which is something they sort of are thought to do because they have poor waterproofing on their feathers. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any cormorants doing this in Tottenham. I don't know, maybe it was too cold and they didn't think their wings would dry. So all we've got is this cormorant sort of swimming along looking a bit more like a water snake. However, I do have a photo of a little cormorant drying itself in India. So this is what they sort of normally look like standing with their wings outstretched. Another bird that lives by the water, this is a grey heron. When I first spotted this on the opposite bank to me of the River Lee, it was quite magical. Here was this bird right there and I could see it and photograph it easily. Only the day before I'd been sort of climbing through brambles trying to get close to one to get a decent picture of it, and I'd managed to spook it. So it was quite remarkable for it to suddenly be there. But I was not at all prepared for what happened next. So the bird took off from where it was on the opposite bank of the river and flew straight at me, landing around a metre away. I had to step back considerably to be able to get it in this shot. And I was very confused by why it was so bold and behaving this way until a door opened in the block of flats behind me and a man came out and spoke to it and then threw it some fish. So clearly this heron has a friend that lives in the flats nearby, and that's why it was quite so bold. Just down from the heron were these guys. They weren't that easy to spot. They were working their way along the bank of the opposite side of the river again and were well camouflaged against the mud and the overhanging branches. They also kept diving and reappearing somewhere else, so getting this slightly blurry photo of the two of them took quite a while. But these are little grebes, or alternatively called dab chicks. Okay, so moving away from the river, this is the first of the tits that I've seen. There are 6 species of tit in the UK, including the blue tit, the coal tit and the crested tit. I hope to find some of the others over the coming weeks, but this is a great tit. It's the largest tit in the UK and pretty easy to identify. Thankfully, they're also quite noisy, which helps when you are trying to find them. This one was singing his heart out when I found him. Another very vocal bird is a song thrush. As the name would suggest, these guys have a very characteristic call. I did try to record it for you, but it didn't work brilliantly. However, the RSPB do have a recording on their website if you're interested. In the UK, song thrush numbers have decreased in recent years, potentially due to changes in farming practices. However, thankfully, the population is still strong on a global level. Rose-ring parakeets. I know they're not a native species, but I cannot help smile when I see parakeets in London. They're just so incongruous. It doesn't feel right that these tropical birds are thriving here, and yet they are, even in the depths of winter. This lot were busy investigating a hole in a tree when I found them. They're just such curious creatures. And so on to my final species of this week, a kingfisher, or also known as a common kingfisher. These kingfishers have a really wide distribution and can be seen across much of Europe, Asia and North Africa, although there are some slight variations in the colouring you see in different regions. I have to say I had help finding this one as someone else had already spotted it and was kind enough to point it out to me when they saw me carrying binoculars. It really made my day. That's one of my top tips, perhaps, if you want to see lots of wildlife, is to just carry some binoculars with you when you go out, and other kind people will point things out to you if they think that you look like you might be interested. So that's it for the wildlife spotting. I hope you've enjoyed hearing all about the species I've seen. And I look forward to updating you on what I can find in the coming week. Hopefully, maybe some more mammals. You never know. Maybe we might find some reptiles or some amphibians. We'll see what we can see. This challenge, I cannot really say enough how much fun it has been to be getting out and looking for things and walking and moving with sort of some kind of purpose. If you're sitting at home now and you think that looks fun, I'd just get involved. Nobody minds latecomers to the party. We're 5 days in, but there's plenty of time to get involved and take on a warrior challenge. You can always choose to finish it 5 days late, or you can reduce the distance a little bit so that you're making taking that into account. But it has been really good fun, and I would recommend you all get involved and support Wildlife Vets International. Thanks very much for listening.